We're talking about compost, and the chickens are related. Well, here's waste from my house, and this is actually all edible. There's organic banana peelings. There's, you know, stuff that I just made a salad with, and there's even watermelon. Here, I'm gonna give some to the chickens. But what I do is I give my chickens my waste. But if you did that in suburbia backyard, they would draw flies, and that's what you found out at your house. So she doesn't feed the stuff to the chickens anymore because it draws flies. So if you did, you'd have to go out there the next day and rake up all the mess and put that in your compost pile. Some people like to just dig a trench and bury it in the ground and, you know, call that compost, but that ain't compost. That's buried crap in the ground that eventually rots, but it's not compost. So some people actually compost in the chicken yard, where they'll put leaves and the chickens scratch it all up and eat the bugs and stuff. I don't do that either. I'd rather have them out and feed them out here somewhere and not worry about the bugs. They can eat the bugs too. Flies. I don't worry about the flies. But I noticed that really I don't have much of a fly problem the way I compost, and you'll see my composting system, and then you'll see the what we're going to be doing on a circle. It'll be a circle of wire, and we'll be layering leaves, weeds, grasses, whatever from our gardens, and horse manure. And if you don't have horse manure, there's lots of horses around. People have horses. People have backyard rabbits. They have goats. They have sheep. So you kind of have to scour your friends and your neighbors and find another source, because your other option is to fit your lawnmower with a grass catcher. Because grass clippings, shredded grass, literally is almost the same as horse manure. It just hasn't gone through the gut of the horse.
As far as the nitrogen content.
Yeah, you need the green shredded up grass, and if it's too thick, it'll basically start a fire. I mean, you know, it's not good to have it too thick. So you need to layer the brown leaves, which are dead matter, and the grass clippings if you don't have manure. It's far better to also have manure because it activates the pile and makes it all break down quicker. So a layer, and you also want to put some soil or finished composting or compost in on it. And you want to make sure everything is moist.
Now, what does that do by putting some finished compost in?
It inoculates. It puts the element of, well, you will see when you see my pile, it's full of worms, red wiggler worms. And a lot of people buy these self-contained bins that have little cranks on them. The worms can't get in there.
Okay.
The organisms that actually turn the pile so you don't have to are worms. And all the other little critters that go into the compost pile. So it's very, very important that the compost has access to the soil so that the worms can get up in there.
That is one thing I've noticed with my soil. I don't have worms.
Well, you don't have worms. Sometimes you have to buy them.
I have.
So if you do it right, and maybe you'll learn that today about what doing it right means, the worms will come. And if they don't come, you come here and get some of my worms and put some in your compost. But it's interesting because that horse manure that I got from the Lone Ranger, when I opened those bags of, there's no worms in there. So is that the biodynamics that we have going on in this farm? The reason that the worms come without me ever buying them? Is that like the magic of biodynamics? Or will we find worms when we open those bags? I don't think so. I don't think there's any in there. But some people sell them. And you bought them, huh?
I bought fishing worms and said, go for you little worms.
Well, there's different kinds of worms. There are red wigglers. There are composting worms, and there are worms that you have to have in a place that doesn't freeze. They basically raise them for worm castings and stuff. So there's different varieties of worms. Anyway, so basically, I really think that it's really good if you are in suburbia. You have your little wire circular, and you are on a daily basis, I would say twice a week, you want to get a bucket like this that you can recycle from a paint can or something, you want a tight fitting lid that either snaps on or screws on. It's easier if it screws on. It's easier to get it off so you can put stuff in it. And every time you dump it, you want to wash it out good so it doesn't stink. But you want to dump it twice a week at least, and put it in your compost pile. Sprinkle it in your compost pile if you don't have chickens to feed it to, and cover it up with leaves, grass clippings, manure, and soil. That's the way it goes. It's like a little of this. Each thing has a layer.
You layer it.
You layer it so that everything, and make sure that it's wet. And then if you're concerned with rodents or critters getting in there, it's very important that that wire enclosure is critter proof if you are in an area where you don't really want to have that. You
Now,
can get
why do you need it enclosed?
it because it will dry out and it'll
Okay.
get too much rain. After you finish, if you're getting to get a lot of rain, you want to put a tarp over it. You want to keep a tarp over the top in any case
Okay.
of some sort. You could use just plastic tied down with 4 milk jugs or something to keep the wind from taking it away,
Okay.
and just to cover the whole thing, because you want it. You don't want too much water, and you don't want it to dry out.
Okay.
So you want that kind of shaded, environment, dark, shaded. And you don't want weeds growing up out of it either, preferably. You
Right.
want it, you'll see when you see my composting area and how that works. But let's see. Yeah, so you need, what's nice about the round circular thing, and there's a guy down the street who has a little garden, he's been there 20 years, and he has a fairly big circle. His garden is pretty small, but all the waste from his house and his yard, and all the waste, the weeds and the spent vines, the tomatoes and the squash, all goes in there every year. And then every spring he takes it, takes the wire enclosure apart, and he takes everything that's not finished and puts it to the side, and everything that's finished gets put on the pile. I think he does it in the fall, but that's what you need to do. You need to put that compost on in the fall, hopefully plant a cover crop at the same time. You spread the finished compost, you plant a cover crop of rye or wheat or barley. That's probably the best things to plant. Is that what you do?
I do buckwheat and peanuts.
But they
Some
will all,
peas.
the only thing that will survive, they won't survive the winter.
No, they don't. You're right.
Yeah, you need to put something that'll survive the winter. Rye is what you use when you haven't had time to do it in September, you haven't had time to do it in October, and rye is the hardiest. And what I do in the spring is I mow that rye, because sometimes it'll get this tall and it's really hard to turn it under. So what I do is just, I mow it, take the mower and just mow it. And then take the clippings and throw it on the ground before I turn it under. And then after you turn under that rye or that cover crop, you want to wait 2 weeks before you plant anything. You want to, turn it over so that there's no, nothing green on the top, turn it under, and then wait 2 weeks, because that breaks down. That rye will break down in the soil in those 2 weeks, and it won't allow seeds to germinate. So you want to do it as early in the spring as you can, and then make sure it gets this 2 week rest to break down before you plant. And I know I'm not taller than you. I don't need you to hold it.
Oh.
I'd be more afraid of you hurting yourself.
Fine, I'm sorry.
Another thing you can do, bang on that. Well, we're just going to kind of mess that up later. But we can at least get them in the ground and get the wire up, and we can get the film done. So what we're going to be doing is you're going to be putting in layers of green and brown and this, so we're going to demonstrate how that works. Well, here's to you, Casey. He loved compost, and I'm just going to show you, because I did say no turn, easy compost. Now what we did was not easy, but that's very easy compared to turning and flipping and doing all the stuff that the USDA says is required to be organic. I personally think they need to go take a class right here or somewhere. But This is the compost I was showing your daughter.
It's beautiful.
And this is without any turning whatsoever. Here we go. Now they're not going to see the mountains of them that we had. Let's see. Get another.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Here's a bunch. Look at that.
Wow, unbelievable.
They're the guys doing the work. Or the girls.
Cool. Amazing.
There, so you create a wire enclosure. There has to be at least 3 feet, but 5 or 6 foot or even larger is fine. This one has an opening so you can get in and out of it easily. And this is the compost preparation that works very well. It's called Compost Starter, Pfeiffer Biodynamic Compost Starter, that you can get from JPI Biodynamics online. And this is very good because you can add some of it each time you add new things to your pile. So it's really designed to work well with home gardeners. You can go bigger and use the whole package if you have a bigger operation, but it works really well for home gardeners. But you put a little bit at a time and you activate it for at least 12 hours. You just put it in good water, like rainwater or filtered water. No fluoride or chlorine or anything. And then you can put it in a spray bottle and spray it on top, or you can just come out here and just inoculate it. It's basically the biodynamic organisms that are going into the pile. Okay, take a break. Pine needles are really good to mulch berries with. All right. Then next step, whoops, this is the Lone Ranger's horse manure. Where's my gloves when I need them? And this goes on top of the leaves. He bedded his horse with sand. So this is sand and horse manure. Don't have to worry about the Monsanto Roundup in the straw when you use sand. So this is the next step, is to add horse manure. If you don't have horse manure is one of the hot manures. If you have your own backyard chickens, you can add that. If you have rabbits, you can add that. If you have neighbors who have sheep or goats or pig or any other kind of horse manure, is good. Horse manure is the best because it heats up the pile. It activates the pile, gets it going. It has more nitrogen than the other ones. Each manure has its own benefit, its own kind of goodness. So a mixture of manures is better than a single manure. Start it yet, I'm getting ready. Let me throw some of this in here. This is one of the layers here, right? So I'm just going to put 2 buckets on here right now.
This is your homemade compost.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Let me get this cart out of the way. Because I want to we've done, that's actually the second layer that we're doing right now. All right. So let me spread this manure around a little better. So, are you ready?
Yep.
Okay, so this is 2 layers of weeds, leaves, and manure with a sprinkling of my finished biodynamic compost on it, as well as a sprinkling of the Pfeiffer compost starter, biodynamic compost starter. So we are actually making a backyard biodynamic compost with the waste from our gardens. But you could do it on whatever scale you want, even down to just a trash can with holes poked in it, buried in the ground. If you have a tiny backyard, make sure there's holes so that big enough for worms to get in and out. And there has a lid on the top. You have holes in the side, and the worms can come and go, and it's protected from mice and vermin and rain. So don't buy one of those compost tumblers. They are ineffective, won't make real compost. In order to make real compost, you have to have living soil, you have to have soil organisms in there, you have to have earthworms in there. And they won't get in there if they're in a barrel spun around up in the air. Silly. Anyway, so, all right, this is the next step. We're doing next stage, which is putting more weeds on top. Again, these just came out of the garden. Morning glories. Ready? These are wild dagga vines, or stalks. And all these weeds and things will bring air into the pile, so you don't have a dense mess. And that means you won't have to turn it to get air into the pile, because it'll be layered in. You don't want to put too many leaves in it once. So all these weeds will shrink down. And there's a little bit of dirt on the roots. See the dirt on the roots and the thick stalks. It all goes in there. You don't have to use a machine to chop it up. Nature will chop it up. Nature will make the compost. You do not have to turn it. You build it right, you layer it in, you keep it wet, cover it up with a tarp when it's all done, keep it from getting too wet, and let nature do it. A year from now, you have finished compost.
So how long do you have to wait before you can use it, Sharon?
Well, like I said, it depends on how well you've built it, how well you've taken care of it, whether you have watered it enough, because if it's not watered, it'll just sit there. It has to be wet, but not too wet. It's kind of like growing plants. If you give it too much water, you drown the plants and they die. If you don't give plant enough water, they die. Think of it as a living organism. It's a living thing. You're creating living soils. If it gets too hot, the nitrogen, you put too much manure, fresh manure in there, the nitrogen will go up into the air and it won't end up in your soil in compost. So you want to create a living compost. So that's the next layer. And after this we have what? Leaves? Leaves is the next one. I put a whole bunch of weeds from the garden in here. And I've put more manure in. I've just put another layer, and it will continue to be layered up. Are you recording my voice as well?
I am.
You are?
Yes.
Hello, world. How can you compost? We have this wire fence so the chickens don't get in there and scratch it all over the place. We actually don't want them eating up all the good compost worms. Let them go earn their living and go scratch somewhere else. But it's got weeds from the garden, layered in with horse manure and straw, and layered in with leaves, alternating. And then some finished compost and a biodynamic preparation called the Pfeiffer Compost Starter from Josephine Porter Institute of Applied Biodynamics. And then as we clean the stalls and clean the gardens, pull down weeds, that'll get layered all the way up to the top, and it'll keep getting layered and layered and layered and layered. And in about a year, we can take the wire off and start another one. So it's simple to make. You can undo it. We already showed how that's undone on the other end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's the finished compost over there. And the other pile of compost that I make with the horse's manure. But this one is a new example of what small gardeners can do. And almost everybody in the neighborhood has a horse or some rabbits or something that you can add to layer your personal backyard compost in until you get your own rabbits and your own chickens. Or if you can't, then you at least can compost your grass clippings and your leaves and your kitchen scraps and all that right there. And it's pretty simple.